Hi folks, welcome. This is the beginning of a playthrough of the full battle of La Bataille de Dresde, designed by Monty Matson, Dennis Spores and Ed Wimble, and published by Clash of Arms Games in 2015. So this will be a playthrough of the full battle, starting in the evening of the 25th of August, and I'll show you that set up in just a moment. But first I just want to go through sort of the brief historical background and context of this, and then I'll look at the order of battle and the initial setup on the 25th of August. In early 1813, an alliance of European states grouped together to once again wage war against Napoleon and the French. Now this sixth coalition comprised the United Kingdom, Sweden, Prussia, Russia and several other European states, and in mid-1813, as the war progressed, they were joined by Austria and a number of other allies. Now in August 1813, both sides of that war had rebuilt some of their forces following the armistice of Placid earlier in the year, and they were both prepared to campaign once more. Napoleon, by this stage however, faced an additional threat to his south in the form of the Austrian Empire having joined the war. In fact, by August, the French were threatened by Swedish and Prussian forces to their north, Russian and Prussian forces to their east, and a large force of Austrians, Prussians and Russians, among others, to their south. Napoleon was thus forced to manoeuvre his forces to meet this coming threat, and the key to his manoeuvres was Dresden here, and its important fortifications, its bridges over the Elbe, and its proximity to the Ore and Lusatian mountains to the south. As those southern allies advanced north up the Elbe valley towards Dresden, Napoleon quickly rushed his forces to Dresden's defence. Napoleon also prioritised this area as it would somewhat limit the Allied cavalry advantage. Napoleon had been working throughout the year to rebuild his cavalry numbers, but he still had much ground to make up. Dresden and this terrain, this area, would minimise this disadvantage. This also, I think, partly explains the poor pursuit after the battle. Yes, Napoleon was unwell, and that's been attributed as one cause, but he also lacked the cavalry numbers to pursue effectively. So, La Bataille de Dresde, by Clash of Arms Games, recreates that confrontation between these forces. It commences on the 26th of August 1813, 205 years ago, when those advanced elements of that Allied army begin to move against Dresden, and it continues through for 2 days until the end of the 27th of August, after which Napoleon has arrived in Dresden with strong French reinforcements. Now, historically, the French held off those initial Allied assaults on the 26th, and then they launched a strong counterattack which forced the Allies into a retreat. Now, time will tell what happens this time around. Here we can take a closer look at the French army. We have Napoleon up here with his aides-de-camp and headquarters, the Imperial Guard, Reserve Guard Artillery, Guard Cavalry, moving down to the Old Guard. The Young Guard with their voltigeurs and tirailleurs. We have the Dresden garrison, those bastions and redoubts. We have the 1st Corps, the 2nd Corps under Victor, the 6th Corps under Marmont, the important 14th Corps under Saint-Cyr, and the Cavalry Reserve under Murat. Now, to take a closer look at the Allied army, we're going to start up here with Schwarzenberg, who was in command of those Allied forces in the Army of Bohemia, and the right wing under Hesse Homburg, consisting mostly of those Austrians. And as we shift across, we can see the left wing under Gyulai, and the left wing Klenau's corps under Klenau, again, mostly Austrians throughout here. And then we shift over to look at the Russians and the Prussians. So here Barclay de Tolly, commanding the Allied Reserve column, the Grenadier Corps, the Reserve Cavalry Corps, and the Reserve Artillery of the Guard Corps. And then the Prussians, the left wing, Army of the Reserve, the Prussian Corps under Kleist, the Royal Prussian Reserve Cavalry Corps, the Reserve Artillery of the Royal Prussian Corps. And then the right wing, Army of the Reserve, that Russian Corps under Wittgenstein. Now I'll be playing through Dresde using Regs 30, in addition to the exclusive rules for Dresden version 1.7, which you can get from labataille.us website, the Clash of Arms website for those games. This is the first time I've used Regs 30 with Labataille games, so I'm probably going to start off very slowly and work my way through. The exclusive rules are also quite long. There are rules for Austrian infantry and the Cossacks and Prussian Landwehr cavalry. There are rules for the redoubts and bastions and bridges, all of which I'm going to have to study carefully. There are rules for, of course, howitzers and mortars. So I'll look to get through before I even begin to set up. Having said that, I'm looking forward to some of the rules that Regs 30 introduced, such as multi-hex units, and the different rules for cavalry in particular. In Marie-Louise, I found cavalry to be very powerful and almost unlimited scope to roam around the battlefield. Regs 30 kind of reins that in a little bit, excuse the pun, to, I guess, give more kind of, force you to consider the movements and the formations of your cavalry and introduce some limitations on that free roaming around the battlefield. As I said earlier, this is good defensive terrain for infantry. I am curious to see how the cavalry will operate around this area, particularly if the French do stay behind those defensive positions. We shall see what happens. All right, it is 5 PM on the 25th of August 1813. This is the very start of Scenario 1, the probe, which I intend to be the start of the full battle. I'll be playing out each day, each scenario, one at a time. The scenarios are all linked, so we start off with this one on the 25th, on the evening of the 25th, this engagement out here between Roth's avant-garde division up here and Clapared's 43rd Division of Saint-Cyr's Corps, defending sort of at the far left side of Dresden. Dresden lies just to the right over here, as you can see off the map. So at the end of this scenario, it links with the scenario starting on the 26th of August, and then at the end of that, it links with the 27th. So they all link together. As I've said, this is the first time playing by the Regs 30 more advanced rules, so I'm approaching this very cautiously. The French have set up their skirmishes. They need to hold part of this town and the windmill heights over here. But I'm going to focus most of my effort. The French plan is to, I guess, have a forward defence, try and defend along the town outskirts and along the edges of this just elevated terrain here. If the Russians advance, I think, to about here, they can be struck by these French artillery pieces across the river down here. That's if they come around this way, if they do that. I do have some French positioned over to the right, and their plan is to head straight down the road and really see what happens. If the Russians have advanced on their left, they can move into a position around here to the right. Otherwise, they can move into town and reinforce these positions up here on the heights. The French do have 2 artillery batteries. There's one here, and there's another here, which is limbered and plans to move up into this position here. So the French skirmishing at the start, artillery unlimbered here in the town, giving a pretty good field of fire out in front. Another artillery brief will move up to here, and the rest of this 43rd will probably just link in on the left-hand side here. The skirmishers, the French Legier, will probably just pull back to the town. Now, I do have the, what are these? These are the Hussars. I have them in a cavalry company of columns, really just to become accustomed to the different formations. This is, whilst there's low density on the map, whilst things are not really desperate elsewhere, I'm going to try and see how we go with manoeuvring these different, this single cavalry formation. Now the Russians, way out here, don't really have a plan as yet. They're just going to march down this road here. They're going to set out their skirmishers out in front, their 3 Jaegers out in front. They do have just the 1 artillery battery, but it's a strong one. And a lot of infantry and some cavalry under here. And they're just going to see what happens. They'll probably just head straight into the town, straight down the road, straight into the town. Nothing too fancy about it. Use their, what I think might be their early numerical superiority to push the French out of town. And we'll see what happens, what develops out here. That's the initial plan. So this is, again, this is the 25th. This is really before the full battle began. This is really when Schwarzenberg had his opportunity to seize Dresden whilst it was relatively lightly defended. He hesitated at this moment, and a wave of French reinforcements arrived this evening, and of course throughout the next day. He hesitated. Some believe that Sincere gave the impression that French numbers were larger than they actually were. Others believe that Schwarzenberg was wanting to know exactly where Napoleon was, and he was a bit hesitant in attacking. In any case, there's this sort of brief encounter out here on this evening before the battle develops more fully the following day. So as I said, the French are going to try and hold this pretty important ground here. The Russians are going to try and capture that before nightfall. I will report back soon.